Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Educational Designers United. I'm Michael. And in this episode, what I'd like to talk about is another entryway into blended learning. We're looking at different ways in for faculty who aren't sure where to start. And for this video, I thought I'd looking at what I call the 6 Ps of blended learning, seeing what they look like in asynchronous form and synchronous form, weighing out strengths and limitations and seeing how we could put them all together. So let me take you through a couple slides to make that a little bit more clear. So the 6 Ps of blended learning are these. So let me go through these real quick. Preparation. That means what a faculty can do to help prepare for the lessons that are coming up, to know what is needed and where their students are. How do instructors prepare for their classes? Okay. Then there's participation. How do students participate in asynchronous spaces as well as synchronous spaces? Okay. Then there's pace. Okay. How do instructors pace an asynchronous class versus how does an instructor pace a synchronous class? They're different. Again, strengths and limitations, which we're going to look at. Place, asynchronous, where does quote unquote place happen, as well as in face-to-face or synchronous, where does place happen? And how do we think about those and what can we do to sort of take advantage of both or one of them? Personalization means how much can the learning in the course, in the blended course, be personalized to individual students, ways of learning, their needs, their preferences. And then personal interaction is how does the instructor work with students? What forms does that take in the asynchronous space, and what forms does it take in the face-to-face or synchronous space? Okay, so those are the 6 Ps, and what I'm trying to think through with you is a way to, can we weigh the strengths and limitations of both asynchronous blended learning and synchronous blended learning? Because if we could sort of look at the strengths and limitations, then we can take the best and hopefully move to the side any of the limitations in the asynchronous blended learning space, as well as the limitations of the synchronous learning space. And hopefully what we could come up with is the best of both worlds, taking in the best and the strengths of both and making a really, really great blend. Okay, so that's sort of the idea of what I have here for this video. So how do we do this? Okay, well, another thing to consider and think about is when I say asynchronous, I think what we should be thinking about is that these asynchronous things are unbound by time and place. So this is a great affordance, but there's also some constraints to it, some limitations to it. Synchronous takes two forms, as you see. So when I say synchronous in blended learning, I could mean synchronous online, which is bound by time but unbound by place. So you have to do it at a certain time, but you could do it anywhere. And then face-to-face, which is the most constraining. It's bound by time and place, but it has its strengths. It also has limitations. So this is how we're going to sort of look at the 6 Ps and pull apart what the strengths and limitations are. Okay, so let's take a look. Let's analyze the 6 Ps of blended learning through that lens, see what we come up with. Okay, so asynchronous strengths. All right, you have an online course, let's say you're using the LMS, it's purely asynchronous. What are the best what's the best of that? What are the strengths that we can look at and perhaps harness and exploit to the most? Well, when we look at preparation, okay, you know, online quizzes, surveys given before class. These are great ways for teachers to see where their students are and prepare for that next class. So the strength of asynchronous prep is that there's a lot of ways to do it, and you can get a lot of data through online tools. What's the strength of participation? Well, it's very flexible. Anytime, student schedule. They can do it when they have time. Participation, and if you're doing it asynchronously, some students don't like to raise their hand in a class and stand up and be in front of everyone. They'd rather do it through text. So there's a lot of strengths to online participation. Pace can be designed for different students asynchronously. This is a strength, this is a very big strength. Okay, you're not limited to having to get through X amount of material in 45 minutes. There's a lot of leeway here, so that's a very big strength. Place, cyberspace is everywhere, so you can do this anywhere, which is a huge plus. Personalization. In an asynchronous space, there might be room to put in some different learning options for students or different ways of getting through the material. It could be more personalized. There's a lot of options in an asynchronous space, more than if you had the 30 students sitting in front of you. Everyone has to sort of go the same path. And then personal interaction, you can set up different mechanisms of email or discussion threads or FAQ threads where students can get feedback or answers asynchronously. And not have to wait till the next class. These are all big strengths of asynchronous learning, okay? Let's look at some of the limitations of an asynchronous method of blended learning. Let's go back to the prep. Well, sometimes those quiz questions or preset questions, they might not be enough to really gauge where your students are. Sometimes you could go into class, a live class, and ask your students a question and get a response that shocks you. Ooh, I thought they might have known this, or I didn't know they were off on this. So the limitation of the online quizzes and surveys is you probably aren't going to get the full story of where your students are in order for you to prep for the next day. Participation. In the limitation of asynchronous participation is, you might respond to a discussion thread and put a lot into it and not get anything back for 3 days. That's tough for students. People want to get that immediate feedback when they participate, and that could be a limitation. Okay, pace. You would think there's all pluses to asynchronous, but with pace, a lot of times students will put off their coursework and the deadlines. I'm a teacher. When I make something due Sunday at midnight, you'd be surprised how many things come in between 11 and 12 o'clock Sunday night. Was that the best? You had your own ability to pace, but then you waited to the last minute. So again, it's just something to think about. It could be a limitation to asynchronous pacing. Everybody sort of puts off the pacing till the end. Place. Sometimes asynchronously working as asynchronously could be a bit isolating. It's you're on your computer, you're in your room, there's no one there to talk to. It could be looked upon as a limitation. Personalization. There is such a thing as choice overload. So you want to give your students a whole bunch of different paths or ways to do the assignment or to personalize it. And sometimes people get hit with choice overload. They just have too many choices. They almost wish that there was one way to do it. And, personal interaction, one of the limitations of asynchronous interaction is, students, they'd like an answer to their question from their instructor. They don't really like to wait, and it's frustrating to wait. They can't move on until they hear. So it could be a limitation as just like a strength. Not having those face-to-face one-on-one conferences. So it's just something to look at. There is a limitation to asynchronous personal interaction. Let's now look at the synchronous side. So synchronous, let's look at it face to face, or synchronous, online. But in real time, what could we do with what's the strength of synchronous preparation? Well, like I said, if you're in that class and let's say you give a poll or just ask a question, you get a sense in real time where your students are and how you could move forward. You don't have to rely on preset quiz questions. You're live. You know what you know what they know. You know what they don't know. You can move forward there. It's a real strength of synchronous, is that you get a sense of where they are. Participation, as we know, there's a lot of synergy in having a discussion in your class. People are engaged, they're enjoying it, there's synergy, they're riffing off each other. I mean, a live discussion could be there's a lot of strengths to it. Pace, a hard pace can sometimes force a higher state of attentiveness. If you're having your live session and you're going at it pretty hard, a lot of students will feel the need to sort of step up. That could be a plus. It could be a limitation, but it could be a plus to have pace in a synchronous space. Same with place. Learning together, like I say, has a lot of merit. People like to learn together. They like to be in the same place sometimes at the same time, sharing. Personalization, students come into class with their own style. Empowering, presenting or coming to class, and you can see their differences, the diversity, their style. It's kind of great to watch people be personal in a classroom, in a live setting. And personal interaction, we all know that one-on-one with an instructor sometimes could get all of your problems solved for 10 minutes with an instructor. You sit down, you ask your questions, you might get answers that you weren't even asking, but the instructor knows what you're asking and they can help you. So, there's a lot of strength to that synchronous one-on-one with an instructor. And then finally, there are the limitations of synchronous. So when we talk about preparation, one of the limitations is it's really hard sometimes to tell the level of understanding of everyone in your class when you're in the moment, and that's a tough thing to gauge. To be ready to move on is hard to do sometimes synchronously. Participation, a limitation is time constraints. You have 50 people in your class, you ask a question, 35 of them raise their hand. What are you going to do? Everyone can't answer this question, right? So it's a limitation on that side of things. Pace, when an instructor does have to sort of find the average pace, that frustrates a lot of people and bores a lot of people. So that could be looked at as a limitation that has to sort of be looked at. Place, even though people like to work to go and have class together, place could be limiting, that because the instruction has to be designed around a specific space at a specific time. So there's a limitation side to it. Personalization, the limitation is, students have a variety of different learning, preferences, like how they approach their studying, how they attack the work, how they do it. It's different, with different students. So how they engage in class is a very personal matter. Everyone's different in a live setting, and it could be a limitation. And then personal interaction, the limitation of the one-on-one is if you do have 50 students, it's hard to have 15 minutes with each of them, right? So that personal interaction everyone doesn't get that 15 minutes. There's just not enough time in the week. So that becomes a limitation. So these are some of the ways to look at the limitations and strengths of asynchronous and synchronous. Now, how do you make all that fit? How do you now look at all of the different limitations that you have and the strengths, and how do you piece it all together to make a class, a blended learning environment that you love and your students love, and it works and it's perfect. It's hard. To tell you, I don't have a cookie cutter answer, but that's okay. I don't have a cookie cutter answer because there's way too many variables, and we see here class size, the grade level, the subject matter. How experienced is the instructor in blended learning? Is there a lab component? The list goes on, but it's all okay because this is how I look at it. Music has finite notes, but infinite songs, meaning the more we know about the strengths and limitations of asynchronous learning and synchronous learning, the more we could blend them in such a way that it fits your class size and your subject matter and your teaching expertise, and it makes sense for you. Is it messy or requiring a lot of thought and help and collaboration? Absolutely. But that's why we're here. That's why I'm here. And, welcome to the world of blended learning. I love it. What we could make can be so unique to you and your class that it's so worth the time and effort that I just love doing it. And this is just another way in. What are the strengths and weaknesses of what you do in an LMS and what you do in your class? And can we take the best of both worlds and turn it into a perfect blend for you? Love to help you think through that another time. Maybe we could connect, but just wanted to put that out there. The 6 Ps, another entryway into the world of blended learning. Hey, thank you for your time as always.